Tom Foxley, welcome to the Without Limits podcast.
Thank you, mate. Pleasure to be here.
For transparency, this is the second time we are going to be recording this first bit. A few technical difficulties, but I think the second time round going through this, what it does Without Limits mean, could be more special than the first. But before I do that, as I said before, it's a pleasure to have you on. For those people that don't know you, I've been familiar with your work for a number of years now, notably through the work that you did with Jens back in, I think, 2017, 2018. He used to, full of enthusiasm, come in each week to our original Mindset Day sessions, and he would tell me about this mindset practice that he was doing with a guy called Tom Foxley. And then more recently having you speak at some of our Men's Day events. And it's very clear that you've done a lot of work as a mindset coach, but also on your own mindset. And I think that you'll be able to stitch together some of the conversations that I've had with previous guests who are all high performing individuals with a fairly robust mindset. And we often, people that like to think they have a strong mindset, will say things and do things and live out these actions because that's how we're conditioned to try and do it without really knowing why. But I think you probably can answer some of those questions as to why we are how we are. I also like the fact that you have a very different perspective on life. And we'll come on to some of your practices with ticking off the days until you die and things such like. But before we do all that, what does Without Limits mean to Tom Foxley?
So I think part of being human, a part that has to be of being human, is having limits. We are limited by default. And there's an old Jewish saying that says, what does an eternal God who knows everything, sees everything, hears everything, and is aware of everything and is eternal, what does he lack? And that is limits. To be human is to have limits. And I think the special thing about that is we don't know how far they are ahead of us. We don't know whether we're at them or not. And it's that constant receding thing of, am I at my limits, or is it further away that is exciting and fascinating about being human? So to illustrate that with a story, when I was going through what's called my Potential Royal Marines course, which was a 3-day thrashing essentially, you spend 2 days doing all your gym tests and your aptitude stuff, and then you spend the next couple of days just being thrashed out in the field. And one of those things you end up doing is just crawling up in the sand dunes, you're dragging guys backwards. It's your first real exposure to that kind of hardship, and you are soaked wet through. You've got kind of grazes and sores all over you from the last few days, and it's like, now I know what that's like, but then that was the first time that I'd ever experienced that. And it was meant to be the hardest thing that I'd ever done in my life, and it definitely was at that point. I got to the point where I was like, I've got nothing more. I was dragging this guy backwards, doing those backwards carries or backwards drags. So I had my arms underneath his armpits, quads on fire, just dragging him up the sand dune. And I was like, this is it. I'm done. And in that moment, I could imagine going back to my then girlfriend, now wife, going back to my mates in the pub and going, I failed. All those things that I'd said that I was going to do, I failed. And I was about to tap the training staff on the shoulder, the corporal, I think, and say, look, that's me, I'm done. In my mind, I'd quit. I thought I'd hit my limit. And at that point, the index was called. So index is the end of the exercise. And it was like, okay, this is done. We're no longer doing this. And at that point, I learned that was not my limit. The initial point was not my limit. I had more. So from that thing, I learned that I've got to push this back and push this back and push this back and learn that my limits are not where I think they are. It's that Goggins thing of like, you're at 40%. When you're about ready to quit, you're about 40% through.
So is it fair to say that your limits are more of a mindset than an actual physical destination?
I've always found that. And it's like, you have your personality. I have my personality that gives us different limits and different hard stops that we have, and also different things that we find interesting and entertaining and meaningful in our lives. We're always going to, I think they're all mental. Like, I think they're all mental for most of us.
What did the Marines serve as for you in your life, for that part of your life? Why did you join the Marines? I've heard you talk about it before, and I don't think it was the usual path or decision to go into the Marines, for, like what most, I guess, young guys or girls would make that decision.
It was never it was never to serve the country. Unfortunately, I'm not that patriotic. It was never to do something noble like that. And it was never because I didn't have other options. For me, it was a chance to grow as a human being. It was a means to say, hey, I can be this person. And to be honest with you, all through school, I was bullied. I viewed myself as a weak kid. I had a heart condition, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit. I had this self-image of like, I can't do these things. I am stuck. I am a worthless piece of shit, to be honest. I saw the Marines and I saw an opportunity to be something that I could be. I saw a chance to close that gap on who I had the potential to become. So for me, it was you're not supposed to say this when you're out of the Corps or out of the military, but for me, it was a personal thing. It was like proving to myself that I could be something more than I was.
So it sounds like going into the Marines was a conscious decision based on your own self-confidence, self-belief, anxiety around your life at that stage. It's quite a mature, I feel like it's quite a mature decision though to go into the military when you're feeling all those things. Or do you think it's more common than maybe we know because people don't open up about it?
I think like all of these things, I'm rationalizing afterwards, and I have this skill set or natural proclivity to look back at my life and go, okay, well, this was the reason, and to see stories behind things. I think at the time, it just felt exciting to me. It felt meaningful, and it felt like there was no question about whether I should or shouldn't do it. It just felt like you've probably had these things about setting up a business or anything that you've kind of done in your life that you find meaningful. It's like meaning is the thing that we pursue. We are designed to say, this is the direction, this is what I want to attain. And then to do that, everything becomes meaningful. It either serves you or doesn't serve you to get there. So for me, this was just mega meaningful.
I love that. Now, you're a mindset coach, right? And you're critically proclaimed as a high-performance mindset coach. What exactly is a high-performance mindset coach? Because I want this podcast to be around training, nutrition, lifestyle, mindset, inspirational people. But mindset is this kind of thing that gets like thrown around. So what is a high-performance mindset coach? And then how do you define mindset?
My job is to help people become the version of them that they have in the back of their mind. The one that they say, that is who I can be. This is who I have the potential to become. We've all got this in the back of our mind. I think it's just foggy for most of us. I think it's poor resolution image. My job is first to conceptualize that. So basically we'll sketch this out in a better resolution image and then help them attain that. And that typically means approaching that through three lenses: through a philosophical lens, through the what do I need to do and how do I train my character to become better, kind of physiological, so what role does my nervous system play in that, and then psychological too, what is happening in the unconscious that holds me back.
Which do you think out of those three is the most important for people, or which is the one that they come up against the sticking points?
It's a three-way conversation. They're all feeding into each other. They're all influencing each other. I have certain thoughts that influence the way I feel. I have certain physical or physiological instances. If I'm in a sympathetic state, that influences what I do and how I think. It's this constant conversation between body and mind and conscious mind that creates who we are. So you can't just say it's one or the other. Everyone starts on the philosophical thing, which sounds at odds to what most people would say, but most people start saying, I'm going to have more willpower. I'm going to be more disciplined. Very few people succeed in that. From my experience, most people run up against limitations. And those are either they don't have the toolkit to philosophically do this. So to go, I want to be a better version of myself. And what does that look like and how do I do it? But most of the cases, they've got stories that are limiting them, or they've got these physiological things. And the physiological things are like low-hanging fruit, which we can go into if you want to. But I think mostly it's stories that I tend to work on people with, because the information isn't that good that's out there.
So if someone's listening just to and calibrating on their own kind of mindset where it's at, we're talking about three things, right? So philosophical,
psychological, physiological.
What's the key difference between the psychological and the philosophical?
Philosophical is the conscious mind. That's what we decide that we're doing, this kind of evolutionary newer part of the mind, the thing that we typically think of as us, the bit that's in control, the bit that's more human. The unconscious mind is like, what stories have you got? So that's the psychological element. That's the way I view it anyway. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a coach. And I have the abilities within those. So that's where I come from. But it's about blending those.
So is philosophical more of the truth?
What do you mean by truth?
So if psychological is the stories we're telling ourselves, like things that we're viewing something through a lens and we're coming to our own conclusions about it that potentially aren't true. Philosophical is the truth because it's who we want to become, right?
This is a complex question. So what's true? What's real? What's real to you? this table's real, like everything structured around us is real, but also so are my emotions. And so are the stories that I tell myself. And when you are lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, your emotions are as real as this table. When you're so stressed out that you can't sleep, that is real. So I don't think there's a truthful or untruthful. And there's one way of thinking about this that Carl Jung said, and a billion other people have said it since then, that we're intellectually rich, but spiritually poor. I think we spend so much time focusing on this scientific worldview, the thing that can be quantified and measurable or measured, and not enough time focusing on the emotional side. And that is the thing that I see people struggling with time and time again. They're like, if I just need to have more willpower, I just need to have more discipline, I just need to be more focused. But maybe let's look at the emotional reasons behind that you may be struggling.
What's the relationship between a poor mindset and intentional hardship?
Tell me more about that.
So I've heard you talk about voluntary intentional hardship as something, as a good thing, right? As something that can create a more robust mindset. So would you suggest that people who have a poor mindset towards something, I think we need to maybe quantify what a poor mindset would be, but is that because they're not leaning into voluntary intentional hardship?
Can be. It can be. It's one way to come through it, because when you do lean into those hard moments, you discover not that the things aren't scary, but that you are more capable. So jiu-jitsu is a fantastic example of this. When you start out, it is all terrifying and you kind of want to retreat from it. But the more you lean into it, the more you find you have resolve within yourself to push. And that's one way of going through it. But other ways are seeing your stories, generating awareness of them and dropping them over time, or learning to have a better interaction with your emotional state. There's a relationship there, but it's the one thing I come back to time and time again is this mindset thing is a one-size-fits-one solution. And we have to cater to that in order to create growth. Like, I'd love to offer you a cookie-cutter template on this is your mindset program. It doesn't work. From my experience, it doesn't work. That's why conversation is so important. That's why tailoring something to someone is so important. That's why a kind of a stoic journal will only get you so far. It's because at some point you find what's personal to you, and that becomes your limitation.
I think that's what I'm trying to establish in this first 15 minutes is what is, for myself, but also the listeners, like what is mindset, or what, and I think on the very face of things, or the way I would describe it, is the way you view situations or the way you view the world. But clearly that's a very superficial articulation of it.
I don't think it's superficial. I think it's just something that we're working on still, and everyone has their own definition of mindset. I'm not sure I'm even a mindset coach right now. I think I help people become who they're meant to be. And I think there's an element of mindset in it, which is, I think, what people think of as the more psychological side. But I think there's the philosophical side, and I think there's a physiological side too that are equally important to help people do that.
Let's go down the rabbit hole of the philosophical side, because I know that you're into your philosophy and the way you've got a very interesting perspective of your own mortality, and also living in the here and now versus planning for the future. This idea of amor fati is something I've heard you speak about a lot, being conscious of your own mortality, and also in your office at home, I think you've got a calendar where you tick off every day the days before your death. I mean, that's a strange practice, but one that, as I've seen you do it, I mean, it reminds me of my own mortality. And I think I spoke to the fact that my kids are getting older and I'm kind of in this period of life where there's a lot of transitional stuff going on. And I'm very acutely aware right now of my own mortality, the time I have in my relationship with my wife and kids and all that kind of stuff. So where did you become super conscious and aware about that? And what was the trigger?
There's two answers to this. One of them is through reading Stoicism and that amor fati idea, and Nietzsche talks about it a lot as well. The real answer is when my sister-in-law died when I was about 20. And this was the first person in my life who wasn't supposed to die. And it shocked me to the core. I was everything kind of ticked along until then. It's how it's supposed to be. Sure, things were hard, but this was the first thing that was a fucking punch in the stomach to me. And we're very lucky my brother's remarried and his new wife is an incredible woman, but I'd never seen someone just die like that. She had rare form of cancer and she just died overnight, basically. That reminded me it showed me for the first time that this was fragile, this experience that we had right now, that we take it for granted. and it can end at any point. And the point of mortality is there is no future. That's just an illusion. That's something that is stuck in your mind as a kind of an anxious hallucination. There is no past. That's a hallucination too. It's just a memory that you can't like quantify it. You can quantify this moment, or you can see this moment here. I can see you. We're having this conversation. That is real. So for me, Amor Fati is a very inspirational thing. Lots of people say it's a stress-inducing thing. I remember one mentor that we've spoken about privately. He was like, what the fuck is that doing on the wall? You need to get rid of that because it's scarcity mentality. And I was like, no, not for me. This reminds me right now, right here, that this person I'm coaching or this conversation, this is the thing that matters. Everything else will come when it's the right time. But this right now, this is what matters.
So I mentioned that I'm aware of it, but then you go through periods of, days, weeks, months where you stop thinking about it until there might be a trigger. There's something you see on social media or something happens and it kind of comes back to you and you're like, I need to get back in the present. So what other things, bar ticking off days until your last day, is there that you can constantly remind yourself to live in the moment?
Meditation is one thing. I think it's a useful tool, but let me ask you, how does your experience change when you realize that? How do you change? Like, what changes about how you see the world at that moment?
In all honesty, not that much. Like, and I can't really put my finger on why. Like, I see things and I'm like, it reminds me that I need to be more intentional in that day, or with a particular relationship or something that I've let go dormant in conversations or people that mean a lot to me. But then life gets in the way again. So until the next trigger, and you tell the story of your sister-in-law. Touch wood, unfortunately, nothing like that has happened to me yet, and I'm also very hyper aware of that fact, and I don't want that to be the thing that then changes the way I live my life. But I feel as though until you encounter it, it's very difficult to know how to change and shape your behavior.
Yeah, maybe, but I think that by truly understanding it and hearing it and embodying that, I personally feel, and this is why one mindset is one size fits one solution, because that makes me act in a way that, this moment is important. And that stops me being anxious about the future. It stops me kind of living in my past. It's like, death is coming for me. It's coming for all of us. We don't know when. It could be 5 minutes from now. It could be 50 years from now, but it's coming. And that helps me go, this moment right now, I'm going to maximize this right now. Yeah.
I suppose at the moment, like, as I'm articulating, I don't ever think like I'm not living in the moment, because I literally work day to day. If anyone in the team, they'll know they'll know just as well, particularly someone like Jens, who spends a lot of time with me. Like, people are having to put things into my diary and people are having to remind me of what's going on next week and further down the field, because I literally work day to day. Yeah, I think it's a little one that I need to probably spend a little bit more time mulling over. Okay, so I'm trying to, for the listeners, I'm trying to unpack mindset a little bit and find a way in which we can start to put our finger on the pulse with what this thing is that we're talking about. How does someone that might perceive themselves to have a poor mindset become aware of it? And what are those key things when people are coming to you? How can you decipher for an assessment to say, okay, this person needs some work? And then what are the frameworks that we can start to use, interventions, to start to build and develop mindset? I appreciate it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but what are the key common things?
Let's look at the principles. So when people come to me, they're typically thinking about, I want more freedom in my life. That doesn't mean necessarily growing a business. It means freedom from old limitations. They want an element of self-leadership. So like this kind of self-mastery, I'm in control of my life, and they want to make every day count. Like, those are the three things that kind of unify the people that I particularly work with. There's a bit of change with that. But there's three things that also facilitate that. Having a sense of calm. So you know that you are in, or you have like one box ticked if you physiologically feel calm and centered and present in this moment. So many of us are rushing around. We're frenetic. Our body feels anxious and stressed out, or kind of like heavy and lethargic. I think there's a sense of calm that we get when physiologically we're attuned.
Is that what people would refer to as like a flow state?
I don't think so. I think this is more like, I feel like flow states are these things that you get occasionally if you're lucky. They seem to appear. but there's certain things that you can do to manufacture a good enough version of that. For me, this calm is a physiological sensation where I don't feel like my heart is beating through my chest. I don't feel like sweaty and clammy. I don't feel like I've got nerves in my stomach. I feel like physiologically I'm prepared and centered and not like depressed either. I'm not sad.
Is there any data or any way we can quantify someone being calm? HRV. Okay, nice.
That's where I start. So when I start working with people, I track sleep quality subjectively. I track HRV, sleep length, alcohol consumption, drug consumption, steps per day, first time out in natural light. There's a load of stuff that I actually quantify there and track that. And then I ask for a subjective measure. So it's called a Likert scale. So 1 to 7, how like was your arousal level of the day? So like, what's your stress? Were you really low and heavy and lethargic, or were you like super anxious and stressed out? 3 or 4 is like, so I was in the middle. That's kind of the average.
Okay, that helps me, because this idea of calm, my perception, understanding of calm is something very different to what I feel every day. I feel like it's chaos, but I feel calm in that chaos. And like, to use data like HRV, sleep quality, all those kind of things, like mine's pretty good most of the time because I optimize for it. But so I don't want to get it misconstrued that calm doesn't necessarily mean one thing or the other.
You're in the eye of the storm. Like there's a difference between being in chaos and being in constantly changing environments, being calm and centered within that. And that's, I think, where we thrive, where we're dancing on the border of chaos and order, where we've got 1 foot in the stable, where it's like, I know how to do this, and 1 foot in the unknown, where it's like, I've got no idea what the fuck's going on. And that's like the maximum sense of excitement and meaning for us. And when you align that, like you have done, to a lifestyle and a project that is truly meaningful for you, that is when you fire. That's when you're like, fuck yeah, this is what life's about.
So on the flip side of that dancing between chaos and order, in line with this bigger vision and having real purpose, is then potentially burnout and the anxiety, right? When you're misaligned with the vision and you're playing too much in the chaos and the order.
So I'd say that's more of the kind of psychological and philosophical side of like, where are you aligned to? Because we need to set that aim. Like for me, that's like, just the calm bit is purely physiological.
Okay.
Is my body physiologically kind of stressed and anxious, or is it heavy and lethargic and kind of depressive? And I don't say depressed because that's not my kind of domain, helping people. I'm not making sick people better. I'm helping people close the gap on their potential. So it's like, what is that physiological state that makes you feel calm?
Got you. Let's park physiological. Next was
psychological.
Yeah. So how do people present to you negatively when they're in it psychologically?
Are they running unconscious patterns that repeat themselves over and over and over again? For a lot of people, that feels like I'm hitting this glass ceiling that I can't break through. So that could be they know they've got such and such to do in their business, or they know they've got their nutrition plan to stick to, or they've got their training plan to stick to, and it's just like I'm bouncing against this idea. And as soon as I kind of build up the tension of growth, I get pulled back down to this bottom baseline of like what feels like my natural resting point. And that could be for a few reasons, but they come from the unconscious. This is the way I view it. There's lots of other ways to view it. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but this is the way that I view things. We have unconscious stories because life is so complex that we internalize. I read something the other day that our body feels 11 million bytes of information a second. We process 16, not 16,000, not 1,600, 16 bytes of that. So we condense that into stories, and we remember the stories and then we live them out. Like, that's a very simple explanation of that. But we become our stories because that determines our actions, and our actions determine our results, and then that determines our success. So sometimes we just hit the edge of a story. And the way that people present themselves is like, man, I'm frustrated. I just can't get out of this. So that's one part of it. Stories is a big part. And there's other elements of the collective unconscious, which are essentially archetypes that we map out. And that's kind of a deeper level of this.
So in a practical sense, then, overcoming some of those barriers and ceilings, is that things like journaling and where sharing your wins and that kind of stuff can help you overcome those?
Yeah. I used to think that conversation was irrelevant in this, but I think since I've got better at being a coach and kind of this weird, almost counselor type role, the conversations are key. Journaling is a great way to access this. And one way we like to do it is an exercise that we call learn your language. You used to call it observe your inner athlete when I was working with CrossFit athletes. But learn your language is simply like scrawl whatever comes to mind, like whatever comes to mind. And you'll probably think I'm insane whilst I'm doing it. And you'll probably go, man, I'm not proud of who that person is. But when you start doing that, your patterns come out. And you do it like almost unconsciously. Just whatever comes out in your mind, whatever comes into your mind comes out on paper. And then take 5 minutes and look over it. And you might see themes. You might see patterns. My job as a coach is to help people guide themselves through that. And so what do you see? Like, what patterns do you see? So that's one part of it. Conversations and action is really useful as well, because it might be that you're trying to do something, but you run up against this limit. And it's like, then we can explore the emotional part of you.
Is that a case of writing it down as soon as it comes into your mind? Or is that a case of best practice being in the evening when you're kind of going through that day?
A few different things. I like to, first thing in the morning, write out whatever's coming to mind, because that's when the unconscious mind is, you're almost in that semi-dream state. Literally first thing in the morning, start writing what's come to your mind. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is kind of analyze what's been happening during the day and just go back and go, what was it like at this point? What we're trying to do when we create psychological growth is do two things, in my opinion, again, like there's lots of other schools of thought here, is strengthen the will. That's that conscious part of you. This is what I want to do. And that's where philosophy kind of comes in and helps. And then generate awareness of our emotional states. And that's the bit that we are pretty shit at as a society right now, or a culture, I'd say. We kind of blow past these emotional states instead of going, what has this got to teach me? Because that is part of reality.
And I say simple because it's actually in practice, it's very difficult to sit down and write for a number of reasons. One, because people are not aware of their thoughts. Two, because the actual practical constraint of sitting down and writing something, and I guess just the belief in the exercise working. But is it that simple to start to overcome some of these ceilings and barriers?
There's 4 steps that we take people through. They all begin with A. Acceptance is the first one. Acceptance is like, okay, I'm accepting that I need to change and that mindset has a component, or my psychology has a component, or that, more to the point, I am important in this and it's probably my shit that I need to sort out. So acceptance is the first one. Next one is awareness. Awareness of the stories that are coming up, the thoughts that come up, the emotional side that comes up. Because so many of us just try and like force ourselves to be different straight away without generating the awareness. Frankl said between stimulus and response, there's a gap, and in that gap lies your power. That's what we have to generate awareness of. The bit between, oh, well, I got stressed out and then I just fucked off my nutrition plan. There's a gap in that. And the more aware that we can become, the more choice we have in that. And that goes, well, now I can pay attention to that gap and I can change it. So that's the next step, awareness. Then accountability, not to me as a coach, but to you and your future self and to who you want to be. Like, I'm just a caveat for that. I'm just like kind of a side thing. We sometimes use me as a way to generate accountability, but in the long run, it's all about becoming accountable to you. Maybe it's accountable to your family, to your kids to begin with. And then the final one is adaptation. That just happens if you're doing the past 3. They all have to happen at once. You can't just sequentially go through. They all happen at once.
Nice. So then we move on to the philosophical. How does someone, because that's one I think that many people won't have even considered, the fact that their worldviews or their philosophical mind is even a thing. How do people present when they're lacking in the philosophical mind?
It's a rarity, okay, that someone comes to me and they're kind of lacking in that first. It's more like we park the first 2, we cut the chains on the first 2, those are the limitations, and then we have the facility to grow. If someone is kind of not becoming the person, or they kind of haven't got the vibrance that they want in their life, that's typically what I look for. Initially I go, well, is it one or two? Is it psychological or is it physiological? Are those the kind of what's going on there? If it's not, then I know that whatever happening is just is a lack of character. It's like, I'm trying to train your character. I'm trying to train your soul when I train someone. That's what I'm doing. And the Stoics have a great idea on this. I don't think Stoicism is everything. I think it misses out part of fundamental human nature, because I think it kind of becomes too logical. But they talk about developing virtues. Wisdom is the ultimate virtue that kind of contains all the others. So just think about being wise? Am I being wise? Temperance is one. Am I regulating myself? Am I doing the right amount of the right things and the right amount of the wrong things? Am I sticking to my word? Justice is the other one, is the third one. So justice, like, am I doing what's right for society? What haven't I been through? Wisdom, temperance, justice, and I'm forgetting the last one.
Nice. Okay, so people go through those three things. They come to you. Just remind me, which one are you picking on first? Is it whatever presents itself as the one where there's the easy wins?
The one that, like, say, I will go physiological first. I will always look physiological because we're carrying around our mind in like this meat vehicle, right? So I'm thinking, well, if HRV is all over the fucking place or sleep shit, then it's an easy win and it's something that we can work on quite quickly. And it gets quick results. Like going outside in sunlight for 5 minutes at the beginning of the day has a drastic effect on sleep and then mood throughout the day and all those kind of things. So I do physiological typically, then psychological, and then like build the philosophy afterwards.
Common things that people will come up against will be anxiety, burnout. What else?
A depressive lethargy is a big one. Just like, I can't be arsed. Don't want to do this. Like, I know that I should, but I can't be bothered. That's a huge one. Fear of failure.
I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Because a lot of people come to me that are just scared to do it, and they almost just don't have the internal resources to overcome that fear because of this.
That's the animal farty thing for me. It's like you get one shot at this. When you're on your deathbed, how do you truly want to look back at your life? Do you want to go, wow, I wish I'd done this? Because everyone regrets things. I had this guy on my podcast, Heath Piper. He interviews the elderly and he says, all everyone cares about is what were their regrets. And it's always not doing the thing that I knew I was supposed to.
See, we hear that a lot though, right? And there's viral, Instagram posts about such and such said this on their deathbed, or, this couple are kissing goodbye to each other in their 90s. And like I said, that's often a trigger for me to be like, my mortality is coming. But I'm very fortunate that I'm able to live a life each day that is filled with passion, enthusiasm, and drive, and part of a bigger mission that's much bigger than myself. But for a lot of people, that they're on that rat race. They're in whether it's a 9 to 5 or some sort of environment that they feel as though is the right logical next step within their sort of life cycle. And it is very hard then to break free of that fear and just like cut your losses and get out.
But I don't think it has to be a drastic change. In the same way that you wouldn't go, okay, if I was putting together a physiological training plan, if I was going to make myself into a hybrid athlete, I wouldn't go, well, I'm going to go from 0 to 2 sessions a day. You'd go, what's a little bit better? What's 1% better? And I think we know that because what's less shit than right now? If you go, well, if I can fix that one thing, maybe that becomes a snowball and it builds into something a little bit bigger. A little better, a little bit bigger. And you just become this slightly better version of yourself through that. And that kind of builds momentum.
When I first came across you, you were working predominantly with athletes in that CrossFit space. And I think I actually sent an athlete or two your way. What made you move, not necessarily away from athletes, because I know that they're still in your kind of ecosystem, but more into this entrepreneur that you like to fondly call adventurepreneur?
A lack of meaning in my life. With all the love to the world of CrossFit, it's a simple problem to solve once you get past a certain point. And I found that personally, I came alive once I was working with gym owners, box owners, coaches, online coaches, because they valued something that I valued. And I think there's other people who are doing a great job in the CrossFit side of things. For me, I got to this point where, I know you've heard this story before, I was on my honeymoon, the happiest I've ever been, like genuinely the happiest I've ever been. And I was lying in bed with my wife at 3 a.m. thinking, I've got everything going for me. I'm so happy, but there's this gnawing agony in me. This, what the fuck are you doing with your life? You're not doing what you should be doing. And that was like my conscience in the back of my mind saying, you got to sort this shit out, Tom. There's something different that you need to be doing. And it took that for me to realize that I was living an unmeaningful life. I was doing what was expedient, to use Jordan Peterson's language. I was ticking the right boxes. I had a business that was fine. It wasn't flying or anything, and business is always stressful to a degree. But there was something that was, I wasn't singing the music. Like, we've all got this music inside us, right? That throw line of dying with the song still unsung within us. Like, that's the thing that terrifies me. And I knew that I wasn't doing that. I knew that I was living a life of quiet desperation, to use the other side of that, or the other side of that quote. And I needed more. I was more beneath me, that I had more to give, and it required a fuck it moment. Like, fuck this. I don't think this is right for me. So after that, I threw away my business in one sense. I made probably the hardest decision I've ever made. I got rid of the client base is one thing because it's a revenue and all that kind of stuff. But the main thing was I got rid of my coaches that I was working with that were working for me and said, there's no more work for you. And for me, they're still very close with two of them, especially. And I was like, man, that was really tough, but my heart wasn't in it. Like, it wasn't for me. And like, it was doing a fine job. It wasn't me, it wasn't authentic.
What percentage of people do you think or not necessarily lie awake on the night of their honeymoon at 3 a.m, but lie awake thinking, I'm not living a life particularly fulfilled, and I could go to the grave here having not, established my potential or to ever have, seen true joy in your working life, or even, and working life often bleeds into your social life and everything else, that actually change it.
What percentage actually change?
What do you think? Yeah.
Do it?
That are aware and then take action.
I would say 25%, 10% maybe. I think there's far more people that go, I wish I could. Maybe it's even less than that.
No, I'd say so.
1%. Like, I think it's far more common to be dissatisfied with your life than, fuck yeah, I'm loving it. And of course there's hard days, shit days that you have, but there's like, I've got user bias as well of this, like, because I speak to people who are trying to get over that challenge, but there's a sense in the back of my mind like, you could be more, and that gets problematic when you're not doing anything to close that gap. Because
to be one part of that 1% or whatever the percentage may be, like yourself, right? People listening to it thinking, "Fucking, it's inspiring." Do you have to have gone through the Marines? Do you have to have done that deep work on the philosophy and all these things? Because it just paints this picture of it gets harder and harder and harder to overcome the fear and actually live a life of meaning and being fulfilled.
I don't know about you, but I think you just have to do something difficult that aligns with what you personally find meaningful. Whether that is writing the most insane code that you've ever written and that's something that changed the world, whether it is, I don't know, inventing a new drug that solves this problem, or whether it is being a physical beast and just cracking the kind of fizz that you want to crack. Like, I think it's that. Like, there's something that has to be really difficult and really you, like, that you are aligned with. And you can feel when you're not walking that path. You can feel when you're just doing something that's just hard and shit. That's a very different feeling to, like, this is hard and it's worth it and it still sucks and I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's, like, from the philosophical lens, that's where the reps come in. I try and reduce everything to sets and reps. Like, what are the sets and reps you can put in? Just like the Muhammad Ali thing of, like, I don't start counting my reps until it starts hurting. Same thing. When you can't be asked to be disciplined, when you just want to fuck it off and watch Netflix, that is the rep. When it hurts.
So short of people going out and just, I guess, trying to suffer. We spoke about it before, this kind of idea of voluntary intentional hardship. At what point do you realise, or can you ascertain whether the suffering and the hardship is conducive with becoming the person you want to become versus just now trying to find hard shit to feel as though that's going to be the thing that's going to create this more robustness in your mindset?
I think that is where the emotional awareness comes in, because we're either acting out someone that we're not, we're playing, we've got a persona that we're performing, or we're being us, like the true version of myself. Emotionally, that feels very different to when I'm kind of ticking boxes. And there's a lot about how it feels to me as opposed to how it looks to other people.
Yeah. Because you see, like, Goggins, for example, everyone going out and doing the latest Goggins challenge and stuff, but thinking that's potentially the thing that's going to create that resilience, that robustness to, in the 2 inches upstairs. But I think that awareness of what it is, I think the nice thing you said was something hard that aligns with the person you want to become, and not just blindly, aimlessly doing hard stuff. This idea of scaling down your business. We're talking about your business now, but we spoke prior about scaling down your business. That's going to be something very odd for people to hear on this podcast, because we've had a lot of entrepreneurs in here, very successful people. And that's not to say that finding scale means success, but a lot of people are looking for bigger, meaning better, and scale, whereas you're quite the opposite.
I think better means better.
I agree.
What's a better experience of your life? And for someone like Zuckerberg, that is more. Like, that's his version of better. I think it's creating that change. Bezos would be like more. From what I see, Goggins is like is kind of a what more can I do? For me, this is about like there's this idea of nested goals that I'd love to draw out at some point.
Of what goals? Sorry,
nested. So at the top of this, I have to remember to come back to unifying purpose and mine at this point. The top of this is our unifying purpose, the thing that I think my life is about. The very, like, what are you trying to do with your life? For me, this is to live a life of growth and adventure and facilitate that in other people. That's what I personally find very meaningful for myself.
Is that strictly in the lines of your professional life?
That's everything. That's why I'm going to Pakistan on Saturday for 2 weeks of ski mountaineering. That is how I approach my relationship with my wife and how I will become a father. It's about growth for me and them. And it's about living adventurously, like the hero in your own story. Like, because that's why we resonate with stories, because there's something psychological that maps onto them that goes like, this is like teaching me something about myself. We are the heroes in our own stories. So that's the key for me, like to live that life. So we've got to have that involved. We've got to have a vision of what does that actually look like for you.
So it's like a North Star kind of statement, right? Is what we go for first.
Yeah.
And then a vision, is that an actual vision? So we're trying to picture what that life looks like.
Yeah. Give me a rough conception of what that looks like. What does success feel like for you? What does a good day look like for you? And this is going to be a gist of success. From there, what we can do is compare that to our reality and extract, okay, a 3-year goal. What's that? 1-year goal, 12 months, quarterly goals, all the way down. So there's nested goals, they're within each other. So we go from the kind of who at the top down to the how do I want to, like, what do I want to achieve? Then we get to how at the bottom. And that's, what do I need to do? What are my process goals? And beneath that, it's like, what character do I need to display? Who do I need to be in this moment? And that is the thing that's in your control. So we go from controllable all the way to uncontrollable in the middle. Like, the goals are kind of out of your control, but who you are in this moment, what you do, how you obsess over the process, that's the thing within your goals. So everything that I'm trying to do is facilitated and kind of honed by, does it fit with that unifying purpose that I have?
So there's still a fair amount of unknown with things like, I don't know whether you want children, things like that, but there's things that are going to happen in your life as you mature and go through different phases that are still relatively unknown. But it's when you start to plan for those, it's then being able to pull it into that overriding mission statement.
Yes, for me, like,
because I don't, the danger is people getting overwhelmed by the amount of work and things they need to think about that are so far in the distance that they can't be in the here and now, because again, it's like they're now trying to live in the future again.
So when I'm working with someone, it's like I try and look at, do you have a good idea of your unifying purpose? No one does. Basically no one. That's something I kind of help people with, putting that together. But they do have an idea of like, what do I want to achieve 90 days from now? People sign up with me for 90 days because it's like, it's a nice kind of quarterly goal, isn't it? Like, okay, what do I want to achieve this quarter? It's just long enough to do something quite important. You're not going to change your life completely in 90 days, but you can get your shit together in 90 days. And then it becomes like, what can I do right now, right this moment? What
are the common things people attach to in those 90 days? Is it financial? Is it physical? Is it?
Usually it's, I want to start doing the things that I know I need to be doing, because it's got this, they've gone through a few layers where they've tried the willpower, they've tried I just need to be more disciplined, I just need to turn up to the gym more often. And then it's I want to just do the habits consistently. That's the thing. And because I know that that's what creates the success for me, and I'm not doing them. So I've got this guy that I'm working with at the moment. He's like, I know I want to scale and grow my gym, but I'm just not making the sales calls. And that was him 3 weeks ago. Fast forward to now, and because we have the accountability and the awareness in place, and he's got the specific objectives of, this is how this is what I need to do. I need to make this many sales calls per day, and this is who I want to practice being at that moment. He's ticking them off and he's getting the sales calls.
Is it like life coaching?
I think it's who coaching as opposed to life. I don't give a shit what people do with their life. That's for them to do. Like, who am I to say that like, this is how you live your life. But I'm very good at going, who do you want to be? Who do you need to be? How do we close that gap? And also, just like the phrase life coach. Like, ugh.
What's the crossover of all of this into training and nutrition?
Who you are. The one thing that you control is who you are. Like, that is the center of your experience, and everything else is downstream from that. So that influences, like, who you believe you are influences your thoughts and emotions, influences your behaviors, influences your actions. So translate that into any direction you want, whether that's being a great husband, whether it's being a great athlete, whether it's having six pack and being lean as shit. Like, that's the direction.
Do you feel people that have got their training, nutrition and basic lifestyle practices in order are more dialed in with their who they are?
Can be, or it can be a coping strategy. Like, look at the world of bodybuilding and the shit that goes on in there. Like, I've worked with a few people in that world, like, actually previously, not many recently, but I'm aware of the mental health stuff that goes on in that. And that can be like, I need order and control, because internally it is just fucking chaos.
That's a very fair point. You mentioned Pakistan earlier. Let's come on to like you, because I think there's some stories and I think things we can unpack that I think will give people inspiration for how they actually try and do this. You taking 2 weeks out of your business to go on an adventure. Are you scared to take 2 weeks out of your business and go on an adventure like that?
A little bit. Yeah, like a little bit. There's the physical risk of like going to a country like we spoke about before, where British forces aren't that well tolerated in certain areas. That's part of it, and it's like I can do quite a lot to navigate that. Fear of the business side, I've set it up in that way that doesn't scale, that we started talking about. But today I had a call with everyone in the group, basically, and other people will catch up, to prepare them to go on their own, because it's about going on their own. So the only thing that could kind of fall apart would be them not doing that, but I've prepped them for it.
And just unpack Pakistan a little bit more for the listeners.
Yeah, so we'll be flying into Islamabad. From there, getting an internal flight up to Skardu. Skardu is like this beautiful airport. It's stunning. It's surrounded by the Karakoram Mountains. Then we'll get a jeep to Karimabad, which is a little village. And then we'll go up and set a few base camps up. I think we've got 3 base camps that we're trying to set up in different valleys. Most of those are around 4,000 to 4,800 meters. And then we'll be skiing up to around 6,000 meters, hopefully, depending on conditions and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully skiing some lines that no one's ever skied before. That's the kind of exciting shit there.
How often do you put something like this in your diary?
Once a year. I try and do this, like we're kind of getting on. I'm a bit of a freak when it comes down to this kind of stuff, just of how structured I like to be. But I like to do one big trip a year, whether that is... we did a big Powder Highway ski trip when I was living in Canada, and there's this thing called the Powder Highway, where there's all these ski resorts and mountains along this amazing stretch of road that you just go and tick off, and it's incredible skiing. We actually had shit snow whilst we were there, but that's one of these things. But once a year, I try and do something that truly pushes me and hones my training and how I conduct my life, because that's why we do these things. Because I've grown more over the 9 months that I've had this plan for than like the previous 2 years combined.
And then how frequently would you have like the next level down from that?
Once a quarter, something like that. I try and do like a bigger climbing trip, or go away with my wife, something like that. Like it's freedom for me. That's the thing that I value, is freedom, is choice of how I spend my time.
It's actually so much like training, isn't it? Like all this stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Like the one thing that I'm trying to do here is condense this into sets and reps. What are the sets and the reps you put in? Like, I was a personal trainer, coached CrossFit for a while, and I know that stimulus creates response. So what's the stimulus that we need to have in order to create the response that we want? It's a little bit more sketchy than that, or a bit more nebulous, because the human mind is. But that's what we're trying to get it down to. What are the sets and the reps? What are the objectives that you're trying to get to? Like, how do we create that?
Is there any other frameworks that we can touch on that would be helpful?
Chaos and order is a big one. I think that so much of us spend time in order, predictable stability, but that's to kind of the visual of this that I like to use is imagine like a medieval town that's got a big wall around, and inside those walls is safety and predictability, and there's the markets, you know how to interact with everyone, but it's also stagnation. Like, think about how people used to use siege warfare to kill off a kind of a king and everyone. It's like, the way they did that is by blocking it out, so that the stagnation, they suffer through illness. And that's what happens spiritually when we don't go out and do the shit that we need to be doing, when we don't explore. Outside of the walls is danger, is threat, it's everything that could kill you, but it's also resources and growth and exploration and venture and everything that's meaningful to us. So the dream is that we navigate that border between order and chaos, like that we dance between that border.
It's funny because I was talking to my I was talking to my tattoo artist just this morning about a back piece, and we were sort of bouncing ideas of what we should go for, and I actually used the words, I feel like I want something to depict chaos and order, and that idea of, you know, floating between the two of them.
It's the universal theme, like this yin and yang. That's what it is. It's like the same truth that we come back to over and over and over again is masculine and feminine energies, dark and light. It's like the same thing that we repeat over and over and over. And that's because internally, I believe, that's what life is all about, is navigating those energies. And
we're suggesting people are living too much in order.
Sometimes. Some people are, you know the people.
It's safe, right? It's safe.
It's safe, it's dangerous in a way. That is when you look back at your life and go, man, I needed to take some risks. The other side is we all know there's people who are in chaos too, who are continuously, they don't have enough structure. They're just all over the place. They're wild. And those are the people who needed to like get their shit together, get squared away.
Anything else?
No, man.
No?
There's plenty of places that we could go, but I think that forms a nice structure in terms of like the 4 A's are a key part of that. The 3 pieces of like, okay, physiological, psychological, and philosophical, those are the ways that you can grow. Like use the one that appeals to you most. Yeah,
I think in terms of a practical application off the back of this is, I think the 4 A's are fantastic. Like actually being, so awareness was the first one.
Acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance. So acceptance is just like the ability to actually sit down and start to think about this kind of thing, right?
And also, I'm the one responsible and I'm the one that's going to change this.
Stop playing the blame game.
Because you can get coaching, sure, but you've got to put the fucking reps in.
Then awareness. So being super aware of those things.
Being aware of your internal state, seeing it clearly, hearing it clearly, like learning. It's almost like there's a symphony and you're picking up the different instruments.
Accountability.
Yeah. Taking action.
And then action.
Sorry. Taking action is the accountability.
Yeah.
Adaptation just happens.
And then in terms of looking at, you know, I guess just like a bit of an audit or health check on mindset, those 3. So physiological, psychological, and philosophical. And then chaos and order. Are you living too much within one?
Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing we touched on was like the fear element and the voluntary exposure to that. You discover who you have the potential to become under that risk of failure and the risk of hardship and the things that make you fucking terrified.
Banging. I think we've touched on some awesome stuff. I think what will happen is we'll release this episode and I'll get loads of people wanting to dive into a bit more about it. So you go away to Pakistan, come back in one piece, and I think we'll end up doing a V2.
Sounds good.
Appreciate you, Tom. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, man.